Why did we create the Risk Assessment Survey? Well, the basics of risk management begins with the identification of an organization's vulnerabilities. In other words, what keeps you up at night? We can then classify these risks and deal with them by avoiding the risk altogether, preventing it from happening, or reduce the impact of the event. Segregate it and basically isolate it, or physically transfer to another entity, or otherwise reduce the risk's impact on your church, your parish, the diocese, and our joint mission together.
Thanks, Rod. My name is David Coburn. I'm a member of the Risk Management Committee and attend St. Vincent's Cathedral. I'll spend a few minutes giving you an overview of the survey results so far. First, a bit of an introduction. The survey is comprised of 52 triggering events across 4 categories that you see here. 4 of the triggering events are in the strategic area, 27 in operations, 6 in finance, and 15 in compliance. For each triggering event, we ask the parish to provide a probability and a severity rating of 1 to 10, with the lowest being 1 and the highest being 10. We then determined the total score for each triggering event by multiplying probability times severity. So when we talk about total or average scores, the lowest ones will be those that had low probability and low severity. Conversely, those with high probability and high severity will have the highest scores. The highest score for any one question is 100, which is a probability of 10 and a severity of 10. The survey results contain a lot of detail. Today, we will provide a short review of 6 of the key results, as shown here. We will use this as our anchor slide to review progress along the way. We'll look at number 1, the top total scores for each category. Number 2, the top total scores regardless of category. Number 3, average scores for each category. Number 4, scores for the strategy questions. And lastly, we'll look at average probability scores as number 5, and number 6, the average severity scores. Let's start with the first 2, the top scores within each category and top scores regardless of category. Let's start by taking a look at the triggering events that got the highest total scores among the responses so far. The total score is determined by adding up the scores for each response. This is not an average. Within the strategic area, succession planning was the top score. Within operations, the loss of major contributors was the top score. Within finance, access to capital was top. And within compliance, fire code compliance. Remember, total scores are a combination of probability times severity. As you can see, a loss of major contributors received the highest total score by far at 602, followed by succession planning at 354, then fire code compliance 270, and access to capital 250. It is interesting that 2 of the top total scores have to do with money. This chart now shows the top overall scores across the entire survey. Operations dominated the top 5, as you can see. Not surprisingly, pandemic health risks has the highest. The next highest is around the potential loss of major contributors. The remaining 3 are all around people in terms of staff and volunteers. Returning to our anchor slide, we've added the summary for the top scores as we just discussed, and you can see that at the top of the slide. Now let's move on to the average scores across all questions in a category. This chart shows the average scores for every question in each category. It includes the total average score at the top, followed by the average severity and average probability, as you can see on the left-hand side of the chart. At the highest level, the results show that strategic events receive the highest average total score, as indicated by the number 1 that you see there in black circles, followed by operations, finance, and compliance. However, remember that there were only 4 triggering events for the strategic area. The width of the bars indicate the dispersion of the responses. You can see that compliance had the lowest overall scores, indicated by the number 2, and also has the skinniest bar, indicating more consensus on the responses relative to other areas. Another important thing to point out is that while the compliance area had the lowest total score, the severity scores were highest, as indicated by the number 3. This tells us that the respondents believe the probability of a compliance event occurring is low, but if it does occur, the severity is very high. Back to our anchor chart. So far, we've seen a heavy emphasis on the operations areas, having some of the highest scores across the survey. However, since strategy received the highest average scores, let's look into the detailed responses for each of the strategy questions. This chart shows the average total scores for each of the 4 strategy questions. There were only 4 questions in this area, but each received a relatively high score, resulting therefore in the highest average. The top 2 responses are related to people, succession planning, and long-term talent development. The last 2 are related to growth and emergency situations. Back again to our anchor chart. Let's wrap up our review by looking at the events respondents thought were most probable and most severe. This chart shows the events with the highest probability scores across the survey. Not surprisingly, pandemic health risks was number 1. This is followed by 3 of the items we saw with the highest overall scores. Developing talent, second, losing major contributors, and third, qualified volunteers. The top 5 was rounded out by another people-related issue, succession planning, which we saw in the strategy responses as well. This chart now shows the events with the highest severity scores across the survey. The survey responses point to compliance issues being the most severe. The top 3 are related to sexual misconduct, followed by abuse of elderly, and lastly, active shooter situations. We've now completed the review of the 6 areas discussed at the beginning of this presentation. To briefly review, first, the top total score was loss of major contributors. Number 2, the top 5 scores across all questions were in the operations area. Number 3, strategic events had the highest average scores. Number 4, succession planning was the highest scoring strategic event. Number 5, operations were most probable. And lastly, number 6, compliance events were the most severe. So that wraps up our review. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Rod for some closing comments.
What will the Risk Management Committee do with the results of this survey? We can better prepare ourselves as a diocese and as parishes through resources, tools, education, build better defenses and policies and procedures, and make sure that we have the proper insurance and in the right amounts necessary for our situation. To date, we've had 21 parishes complete a survey. We would like to get a survey from every parish. If your parish has not responded, we'd ask you to pull together your vestry or some key leaders and complete the survey electronically. It's important to your bishop, to the Risk Management Committee, and to your parish. So what can your parish do with the results? We'd ask your parish to prepare for what keeps you up at night.